afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Barry Pavel. I'm Senior Vice President and the Director of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council. And on behalf of our Cyber Statecraft Initiative, which is housed in the Scowcroft Center, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event, Charting Course, Next Steps for Maritime Cybersecurity with Allies and Partners. While we wish we could convene in person, we're still grateful to hold this very important conversation. Amidst one of the most challenging times, certainly in our lifetimes, we're delighted to be joined by such a great lineup of speakers, underscoring the real importance of international collaboration on national security, cybersecurity, and resilience issues. COVID-19's disruptions have included exposing serious and staggering vulnerabilities in our systems and our societies. Collectively, we now understand more deeply something we kind of already knew. The way we work, the way we live, the way we stay connected really relies on our networks. And that's why now more than ever, we need to foster more effective collaboration across sectors, industries, and other boundaries. This is a core ethic of the Scowcroft Center, where we work to develop sustainable, nonpartisan strategies to address the most important security challenges facing the United States and its allies and partners. The center honors the legacy of service of General Brent Scowcroft and embodies his ethos of nonpartisan commitment to the cause of security, support for U.S. leadership in close cooperation with allies and partners, and dedication to the mentorship of the next generation of leaders. In the center, our Cyber Statecraft Initiative works to identify future cybersecurity threats and provide practical, innovative, and relevant solutions to the challenges in cyberspace through its analysis and programming. Our topic today, maritime cybersecurity, is certainly timely. The Maritime Transportation System, MTS, is a complex of arteries crucial to global commerce, energy systems, the projection of national power, and much more. Yet, this same infrastructure is also systemically insecure. Just last month, for example, a suspected government-backed operation breached the port of Houston. Maritime cybersecurity is a significant source of risk for the United States and U.S. allies that must be better addressed. In September, the U.S. Coast Guard released its updated Cyber Strategic Outlook with the goal of clearly identifying priorities for maritime cybersecurity and delineating roles and responsibilities within the Coast Guard to help address this set of issues. In early October, our Cyber Statecraft Initiative released Raising the Colors, Signaling for Cooperation on Maritime Cybersecurity. The report identified specific near and long-term steps for the U.S. to collaborate with allies and partners and the private sector in reducing cybersecurity risks to the MTS. However, there is still much to do, and any path forward must be taken collectively. Voices across the policy and practitioner communities echoed the call for action on maritime cybersecurity in the wake of this report. We're fortunate to have several of these experts here today to update us on progress on MTS risks and highlight areas ripe for new and more serious action in the coming year to better secure the maritime transportation system. One of these important voices, and whom I have the great pleasure of introducing now, is Senator Angus King. Senator King was sworn in as Maine's first independent U.S. Senator in January 2013, and since then has been very active on this country's behalf, including several committee appointments, including Armed Services Committee and the Select Committee on Intelligence. A leading voice on the importance of improving America's cybersecurity, Senator King was selected by congressional leadership to co-chair the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Most of you know, it was a bipartisan effort established by Congress to review the threats facing America in cyberspace and develop a forward-looking plan on how to defend ourselves against cyber threats. And we really are thankful to Senator King for agreeing to join us. And now over to him for his remarks.
Abraham Lincoln was once asked what he would do if he was given an hour to split a cord of wood. His answer was, I would spend the first 15 minutes sharpening my axe. And I think that's what you're doing at this conference. And that's why I'm so glad to have an opportunity to join you. Rather than just commence chopping, it's important to start with the thinking and the planning and the idea sharing. And that's exactly what this process today is all about. I'm delighted to be able to join you and share some thoughts. If you want an example of why what we're talking about is important, just go back to the blockage of the Suez Canal not long ago that tied up $9 billion a day in world trade. And of course, we now know from the jamming up of ports in the United States as we're coming out of the pandemic, the role that ports and maritime trade plays in the world economy and the importance of keeping those flows of trade open. The problem is that we're talking about very complex systems and interconnected systems that involve the ships themselves, the international logistics systems, the port up and down the coastlines, the port systems, all of which are vulnerable to cyber. And I have to remind you that cyber is probably the most serious immediate threat to this country. The next 9/11, I hate to say it, will almost undoubtedly be cyber. And one of the areas of vulnerability is our port and maritime transportation system. Now, there are steps that are going in the right direction. In late 2020, there's a new plan from the Coast Guard and from the government talking about the cybersecurity of the port infrastructure. But I believe that's only a first step. And let me just stop right here because a lot of this discussion is about government policy, government action, CISA, the various agencies, the National Cyber Director. But literally 9 times out of 10, the vulnerability starts at an individual desktop. It starts with some person somewhere in the system hitting on a phishing email. Alert, your Google password has been compromised. Fill out this information and you can reset your password. That's how a lot of these attacks start. So we're going to be talking about government policy and high-level decision-making, but a big part of the solution to this problem has to be cyber hygiene at the desktop and the laptop level. So I just want to emphasize that. The second piece, of course, is how can we work together between the maritime industry and the government to not only cope with these attacks, but hopefully to prevent them. We really are in a place where we have to rethink our ideas of international conflict. Our traditional thinking is that conflict is between an army and an army, or a navy and a navy, between a nation state and a nation state. There's no better example than in the maritime trade system that 85% of the target space in cyber is in the private sector. That's where the attacks will come. International trade, transportation, finance, the electric grid, the pipeline systems, the water systems. That's where the attack will come, so that we have to establish a new relationship between the federal government and the private sector. It's a relationship that has to be based on trust, on sharing of information, on mutual confidence. And, you know, you're hearing me saying this, and sometimes that doesn't come naturally to these two entities, the private sector and the federal government. But we have to be able to share information in real time and share ways to cope with what's happening in real time in order to effectively deal with and ameliorate these kinds of attacks. The other thing that is uniquely in the role of the federal government that has to be part of this solution, if we're talking particularly about nation state attacks, is a deterrent by the federal government. And by that I mean the adversary has to understand that there will be a cost to be paid for any action that they take that's in the nature of a cyber attack that's serious, that has serious consequences. And certainly an attack on our maritime trade system would fall into that category because it would have such far-reaching implications for the entire country and the world economy. So the problem is that historically, in terms of cyber, the United States has been a cheap date. We haven't really responded in a serious and systematic way to the point that would change the calculus of our adversary. That's the key idea. We have to change the calculus of our adversary so that someone sitting at the Politburo in the Kremlin would say, I'm not sure we should do this, boss, because they're going to whack us. And it may be cyber, it may be sanctions, it may be something else. But we have to have a clear declaratory policy from the president. It's got to be from the executive that a cyber attack on a serious bit of American infrastructure will not be tolerated. So that's something that we have to work here in Washington on behalf of the industry, because the best cyber attack is the one that doesn't occur. And one of the ways to make it not occur is to be more clear about what our response will be if a cyber attack occurs. Now, there are other things we can do. We're working and should be working with the maritime industry on testing. I'm a great believer in red teaming your own system. Hire somebody to try to hack it. That's the only way to know whether you really are vulnerable. We have to work on testing. We have to work on information sharing, as I mentioned, and there has to be a close relationship between the private sector, in this case, the maritime trade industry, and the federal government. It's only when we can hit on all cylinders that we can even come close to being less vulnerable. And you notice I said less vulnerable. I didn't say invulnerable. One of the problems with cyber is it's never settled. It's never done. The adversaries are never fully thwarted. There are always going to be new attacks, new ways to try to get into our systems, and we have to be constantly upgrading our defenses and our ability to respond. So let me go back to the beginning. The important thing is that you're in the room, that you're discussing this, that you're thinking about it, that you're sharing information, that the council is facilitating this kind of discussion, because that's what it's going to take. First, a level of understanding of the nature of the problem. And I hope that by this time, after all that we've gone through, the 2016 elections, the OPM hack, Sony Pictures, Solar Winds, Coastal Pipeline, all of those things have told us that this is a serious, dangerous vulnerability, number one. And number two, there are things we can do about it, both at the individual basis, at the desktop, at the company basis, and at the federal government basis. We've reorganized ourselves. We now have a national cyber director to coordinate the activities of the federal government. We've strengthened CISA, the agency within Department of Homeland Security, to provide that kind of real-time communication with the private sector, with someone who is attacked. The FBI is engaged. In fact, in one of the recent ransomware attacks, the FBI recovered a lot of the money. So we have some serious, the federal government has some serious and capable assets to bring to the table on this subject. And it is going to take all of us together in order to defend ourselves against this ongoing threat. So let me conclude by thanking you again for coming together, thanking the council for convening this meeting. And I look forward to hearing and learning of the conclusions that you have today, and certainly stand ready to work with the members of the industry to further strengthen and solidify our defense in a very, very dangerous world. Thank you for what you're doing. Congratulations. And I look forward to hearing the results of your deliberations.
Fantastic. And thank you to Senator King for joining us. I have the great privilege of introducing our moderator, who's going to kick us off on this panel. Nina Collars, Dr. Nina Collars, is an associate professor with the Cyber and Innovation Policy Institute at the Naval War College. She is our third certified bourbon steward of the group, and she gave a DEF CON talk on an espresso machine. And if you haven't seen it, it is truly a highlight. I am going to link it here. I encourage you to take a watch after this event. So with that, nothing further, Nina, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Trey. I appreciate the fabulous introduction. Even as we, coffee is insecure as well. And so let me just kick off by saying, I think just I couldn't stop myself in hearing Senator King's commentary that perhaps we should consider hiring somebody to hack everything. And I just have to say, as a question that's near and dear to my heart, I'm excited to hear the world come around to these, dare I say, sort of innovative, but even just sort of unorthodox or uneasy solution sets as we try and break through and try and create a more secure global system. And the centerpiece of what we're talking about today would be the maritime transportation system. The puzzle is absolutely fundamental. And so I want to thank everybody who's listening today. It's an exciting time for those of us who have been working on this problem set. Many of the people on this panel will have been working the problem set for decades, even though it seems like we have just stumbled across this supply chain problem now. I also want to thank the Atlantic Council Scowcroft Center and the Cyber Statecraft Initiative, both of whom have been great friends to me over time and helping facilitate all sorts of conversations, not just public conversations, but just trying to bring people together to try and produce real solutions. And in that sense, just it's invaluable. In particular, this community has been pointing to what I and others have long attempted to point out, that it's insufficient to design policy and thinking purely for states and state agencies. That many of the things you heard in Senator King's commentary, and I should hope what you're going to hear today, is some truly cross-cutting all the way down the vertical and across government agencies thinking about how do we work together to solve this problem. I will say, and I'll admit, for a long time, I think I felt alone in thinking about this problem set. And there's something really remarkable about this community you're going to listen to today. What you'll also notice is that I think in contrast to a lot of how Washington, D.C. works, how policymakers work, how academics work, you'll actually notice that most of these people on this panel, and in fact, almost, yes, everybody, we all actually know each other. And that's pretty rare because we've all had to sort of work with each other from time to time. And so I'm delighted to introduce people that I would consider not just some of the intellectual premiers in this space, but I'm excited that they're all friends. So first today, I'll have you hear some commentary from Rear Admiral John Mauger from the U.S. Coast Guard, followed shortly thereafter by Josie Long from MITRE, then Sean Klein from the Chamber of Shipping of America, followed by Dr. Gary Kessler, who's a personal friend of mine, and a co-collaborator in maritime ICS issues at DEF CON. The first part of this talk that I'm going to try and facilitate today, I'm happy if my colleagues want to take it off the rails, as I'm gonna think of it as piloting towards progress. I would like each person to talk about sort of what they've done or what they've seen to make meaningful change and to move the conversation forward. And once we've sort of done some back and forth about that, and I invite my colleagues to go ahead and come up of mute whenever they want to sort of do some crosstalk after everyone's had a couple minutes to present their cases. I want to move on to what I'm thinking are our barnacles and blind spots. What do we not see and what's slowing us down? And really, where do we need to get some more action on the area? How do we move this conversation forward? So I'm going to call quickly to the floor here a person who I think has done so much work in this space, not just on the defense side, on the law enforcement side, but also with the private sector, and that would be Rear Admiral John Mauger. So, sir, I would love to hear your comments. How are you piloting toward progress?
Hey, thanks so much, Dr. Collars. What a thrill to join you all this afternoon today. First, before I get started, let me just thank and recognize the outstanding work done by the Atlantic Council for their report, Raising the Colors. We know within the service that our maritime transportation system is a tremendous asset for our nation, both economically and for our national defense by providing support for our national security. And so Raising the Colors, I think one of the most important aspects of that report was it really brought the MTS down to a level that everybody could read and understand. And certainly as we're out shopping, looking at empty shelves in the stores right now and hearing about this supply chain crisis that's going on, we're all thinking a little bit more about the importance of our maritime transportation system to us as individuals and to the nation. And so I think raising the colors is an excellent primer on both the industry, and then provide some great policy prescriptions on how to move forward. Let me talk to you for just a few minutes, Nina, and then I'll kick it back to you about what we've done here within the Coast Guard and across the interagency, working with the private sector as well. So first of all, the MTS really critical to the nation. So this is 25% of U.S. GDP, jobs for 1 in 7 Americans. This is a really big deal, both for our economic prosperity and our national security. This system relies on the efficient flow of information, right? That's critical to making all of that stuff happen. And that makes it vulnerable to cyber attacks and disruption, as we've talked about already. We've heard from the other speakers, and as we've seen in the report. And so we're getting after this by working across both preventative activities and response activities. The issue here is there's a lot more that we can do, and we're going to talk to it through the panel to prevent cyber incidents, but we have to realize that these attacks are going to happen. And so we have to be resilient and be able to respond and recover from these attacks as well. And so that's a key part of our prescription going forward. What I would just kind of focus with throughout the course of my short remarks here is cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. There's things that we're doing as a federal agency, but there's things that we're doing and enabling in the private sector across to other federal agencies, and then working internationally as well. So let me just talk about those real quick. You've already heard that earlier this year, we published a cyber strategic outlook that lays out 3 lines of efforts for the Coast Guard. First of all, we have to protect our own networks. Second of all, we have to protect the maritime transportation system. And then third, we have to be able to operate in and through cyberspace to achieve our mission objectives and get after this threat, because we know, and we heard from Senator King, that defense alone is not going to make us successful over the long term here. So we're approaching this. One of the key things that we did within the Coast Guard was make cybersecurity an operational imperative. We brought it out of a back office administrative function under the CIO and put it under the charge of an operational commander. Every disruption to our network, our communications, our mission outcome is viewed through the lens of cyber now. And we are mission focused on making sure that we can accomplish what we need to do by fighting in and through cyberspace to get that done. Making cyber an operational imperative is part of a key strategy that we need to support uptake within the private sector as well. Again, I think too often folks have looked at this issue as a back office IT admin function, when it really is the core of the business, that information flow, that automation that drives your agency, industry, company forward is critical. And so you got to treat it with that same level of support. We've had a lot of support from Congress to get after this. Through the support from Congress, we've built out cyber protection teams at the national level that both enable our ability to defend and protect our networks, but also provide support to the maritime transportation system by conducting field assessments, by providing technical support to our folks that are out there working in the industry every day. And so that's been critical. Across the Coast Guard, we've incorporated cyber into the prevention and response framework. On the prevention side, with regard to the industry, we've put some standards in place. Facilities are required to have cybersecurity plans, and they're required to have an accountable person in charge of cybersecurity within their organization. They have to go out and do an assessment, and they have to develop that plan to mitigate any gaps that they've found, and then they have to exercise and they have to report incidents. We've been supported by folks on the line here like Josie Long, who will talk to us about that framework for conducting the assessment, and that's some great work that's got us off on the right foot, but we need to continue to build out on that work. On the response side, we've integrated cybersecurity into the area maritime security committees at the field level. Across 35 of the nation's most critical ports here in the U.S., there's an Area Maritime Security Committee that brings together federal, state, local, and private sector folks to talk about security issues that are affecting the port, and then more importantly, develop plans and conduct exercises and get after issues through administration of port security or prioritization of port security grant funding to close those gaps. So those are really critical enablers for us to get our job done. But lastly, let me just say that it's important to remember that the maritime transportation system, as critical as it is to our economy, it also depends on all the other transportation modes that are out there. The rails come into the port, the pipelines come into the port, the surface transportation comes into the port, as well as electrical and communications. And so it's really important that we work together across all critical infrastructure and all transportation modes to apply the same level of effort and the same level of emphasis across the board. And so we're working very closely with CISA and TSA to make sure that we're moving in lockstep, both as the threat changes and to close down vulnerabilities through standards. But it's not just CISA and TSA, it's also the FBI and other federal, state, and local in terms of establishing unified commands during response to incidents. And it's not just here domestically, it's also internationally. And so we've worked with the International Maritime Organization to incorporate cybersecurity into the plans for all those international vessels that are trading in the US. And so there's a lot of work that's already been done. We're by no means where we need to be to get after this threat yet, but we're making good progress in moving down that path. And so, Nina, I'll turn it back to you and the other panelists here to continue the discussion and look forward to the back and forth.
Admiral Mager, thank you so very much. I appreciate, just the nice sort of introductory level primer to all the things that the Coast Guard is getting up to and getting after to sort of help work this problem. And I can't say enough that if you're, the Coast Guard really is front and center on so much of this work, particularly in the ports. All right, so I would like to turn this over to Josie Long. Josie, so where's the progress? How are you piloting?
Thank you, Nina, and tough shoes to follow. In this community, and happy to follow suit with this panel. And thank you so much for the Land Council for organizing this, and thank you for the fellow panelists for participating. So just some background, MITRE is an organization that operates federally funded research and development centers. I'm specifically part of the National Cybersecurity FFRDC. Of note, we are the only, and this is of March of 2017, we are the only FFRDC that's dedicated solely to cybersecurity. In support of being the National Cybersecurity FFRDC, we support the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and specifically their National Cyber Center of Excellence. We do that through trying to increase the cybersecurity posture of the business community through practical guidance, adoption rate of more secure technologies, and accelerating innovation. The senator, when he opened up, he really hit home about collaboration. Where MITRE has found success is through cybersecurity framework profiles. That is the one thing I do want to hit home. The Coast Guard also has found success within this environment, and I'm currently managing a project with Department of Energy and the NIST and CCOE focused on liquefied natural gas within the Marine Transportation Center, or system, excuse me. It's a pet peeve of mine when people mispronounce the MTS, so got to get it right on my side. So the benefits of the profile, and we hit home on the collaboration aspect, you're sitting down in a voluntary, non-regulatory environment with maritime stakeholders, specifically talking about what are the business and mission functions that are vital to their operations. And then you're able to work through the NIST cybersecurity framework and customize down to the control system, specifically to subcats, and there are 108 within the NIST cybersecurity framework. And ideally focusing on what keeps them up at night, what are the most vital subcats to mitigating or enhancing the capabilities of those mission objectives. At MITRE specifically, we're looking at, all right, you have a profile, now what? The Coast Guard has found success with 3 previous ones that were published between 2015 and to 2018. And now we have the LNG focused profile for DOE and NIST. But what happens after a profile? What happens when you get that PDF? How do you implement it? How do you make it operationalized? And we're looking to do that through MITRE tools, enhancing as well as different facilitation opportunities to provide greater fidelity to those mission objectives. What are those specific control systems that support the mission objectives in order then to provide cybersecurity risk mitigations? One other thing that kind of hit home when Senator King was speaking, in addition to the collaboration, but I think we also need to focus on a culture of cybersecurity, a culture of cybersecurity best practices, collaboration, innovation, as well as information sharing. In addition to supporting the cybersecurity framework, we also support the privacy framework as well as the risk management framework. There is cross-pollination, and that's another opportunity that MITRE is exploring, is how can we take all of these NIST frameworks that are amazing on their own, but provide some kind of integration, harmonization of the frameworks, again, then for that corporate and change culture of cybersecurity best practices. Back over to you, Nina.
Josie Long is stunning in her mastery, as always. And if you ever have an opportunity to listen to her DEF CON talk, you should. It's available on the Hack the C subchannel. But honestly, I think when you think about the hard work of creating good standards, it hands down, it's always MITRE, and I just appreciate Josie's work a lot. So let me turn now to Sean Klein for our private sector look. No less important fundamentally. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's an honor to be on the panel, and thank you to the Atlantic Council. It's this panel full of admirals and doctors, a U.S. merchant mariner. So it's a pleasure to be on here. And the Chamber of Shipping of America, we're located in DC. We represent ship owners, operators, and charters that have a headquarters in the United States. They operate U.S. flag and foreign flag ships. And, we represent them in Washington. We also represent them at the International Maritime Organization in London. And as far as cybersecurity goes, we wrote the guidelines for cybersecurity on board ships. We're part of that working group with several industry groups. We call it the industry roundtable, but it brings that whole sector in of different kinds of commercial cargo ships and passenger vessels, and every revision since then. And we did that. We started that because back then there wasn't a lot of guidance out there. And when we talk about what's going well right now, we can always be scared of maritime cybersecurity, but what's going well is we have a lot of owners, operators, and charters out there that are really trying hard. Let me put it that way. There's been a lot of progress as far as awareness goes. You go on board vessels, mariners now are aware of cybersecurity. They're more aware of what not to plug in and what not to click on. Operators are in their businesses are putting procedures and processes in place to address not only cybersecurity training on board, but in their own shops. Because if HR gets hacked, that affects the vessels. If finance gets hacked, that affects the vessels. So it's really a comprehensive look, and also including those third-party vendors as well. So I am happy to see the progress that's been made. I do get a little irritated, I'll be honest, when I hear that the industry isn't doing enough and the companies aren't doing enough, because we have to think. It's easy for us when we live in the cyber world to say, well, they could do more, and absolutely we could all do more. But cyber is one piece of a big pie that keeps ship owners and operators up at night. And we also have greenhouse gas issues and decarbonization and ballast water issues and all these things that are coming at owners and operators. And so what I'm proud to see is that they've taken steps beyond regulation. They've taken steps beyond what's required at IMO to implement risk management into their safety management systems. They're going beyond. They're having additional cyber audits on board ships. They're having additional protocols in their office. So that's something to a step in the right direction, I would say. And there's also a lot that can be done in the future.
Thank you for your comments, Sean. I think it's particularly important that we hear from folks like Sean Klein, in all honesty, because there's what we know about how cyber attacks work and what vulnerabilities are, right? They're at the user operator level. And so we're really talking about a really, really hard puzzle. And if you can get the average highly educated, sort of policy member to click a link, then where better to apply the work, right? And so thinking about this all the way down to the private sector into the operator, ship owner level I think it's imperative, and I think, quite frankly, Sean, I think your puzzle is harder by miles, and I look forward to sort of helping. We all do. So see if we can figure out how to solve these issues, or at least mitigate many of them. I'm going to turn now to Gary Kessler, a friend of mine, but also one of my favorite people to talk from his perspective. Gary.
Well, thanks, Nina. Thanks for that level of introduction, because now there's expectations. So first of all, thank you. This is cool to be part of this panel, and I really appreciate the Atlantic Council putting this together. I actually had a lot of thoughts, and so I wear a lot of hats, and most of them actually center around the education issue. So, I'm a retired professor of cybersecurity. I'm also a non-resident senior fellow of the Atlantic Council, and was one of the co-authors of the follow-up report to the National Maritime Cybersecurity Plan. I also work with a company called Fathom 5 on operational technology cyber. I work at the national level with the Coast Guard Auxiliary with some of the nascent efforts we're trying to make to work with Coast Guard on supplementing cybersecurity. I'm an occasional visiting professor at the Coast Guard Academy, and I'm a scuba instructor with a captain's license. So I somehow try to fit lots of niches here. But one of the things that Senator King said with his Abraham Lincoln quote that reminded me that when I was a baby computer programmer back in 1973, we were always taught, spend a lot of time on design before you ever start writing code. And I observed that I crashed my first computer in 1974, probably being a function of my taking my first programming class in 73, what was essentially a buffer overflow. Well, we still are having buffer overflows in 2021. And I got to ask, my fellow computer scientists and software engineers, why is that still happening? Why is the hacker community seeming to run circles around the software engineering community? And the fact is, we're still putting out code that is not appropriately tested and ready for prime time, which is why I don't know how many of you saw the CISA webinar, I think just yesterday, about the latest 0-day attacks that we're having. We sometimes hear the analogy that the next 9/11 is going to be cyber. And actually, we've been hearing this analogy and analogies to Pearl Harbor with respect to cyber for at least a decade or more. And the only thing I'll say about those analogies is that attacks of cyber are not a surprise. They're not going to be a surprise. We're right now talking about anticipating them. And one of the lessons we did get from 9/11, from the 9/11 Commission report, was that one of the reasons we were susceptible to the attack was because of defenders' failure of imagination and creativity. And I think to a certain degree, we're still fighting through that process. There are too few professional mariners. We have too few professional information security professionals. So when you try to build a cadre of professional maritime cybersecurity professionals, we really have a lack. And that goes back to some of the training efforts that we need to be making, in my opinion. And I'll end this with saying that, these are very, very hard problems for us to try to figure out how to mitigate cybersecurity issues in the maritime space. But I believe that they're truly existential. We've several of us have already mentioned, the amount of imports and exports that we get from maritime, the impact on the gross domestic product, the impact on the labor market, the national security, homeland security, economic security, food security, energy security related to maritime. So, like I said, I mean, I don't think we're making a fuss about something that ultimately is trivial. This is truly existential, and these are essential problems for us to work on. So, with that, Nina, I turn this back to you.
Thanks, Cass. Josie, you want to jump in? Now we can just open the floor for a little bit, and I'll ask you guys individually in a little bit, kind of what we think is in our way. But go ahead, have at it.
Did you see I was anxious to get off mic? So I don't know how many folks are aware or even interested, but the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity developed a cybersecurity guide for SMEs. It's a 12-step guide for securing your business practices. The first one is develop good cybersecurity culture, provide appropriate training. So Gary, very timely and fitting. And how many folks are familiar with the NICE framework? And in the spirit of developing a profile implementation guide, so you have a profile, now what? One of the first steps is assign a team and assign a leader. How many folks don't talk to one another, within your own organization or your business practices? So by, specifically directing and that NICE framework reference, identify some of the qualifications and skill and competencies that the cyber leader, the cyber team leader should have. Those are both two great references as far as training and specifically, the governance and the organizational structure.
Josie, I like where you're going with this, because I think we often talk about education and helping to not just grow the workforce, but sort of general awareness. And I think we're all sick to death of the phrase cyber hygiene. But I'm curious. I want to return just a little bit back to Sean Klein and then over to Admiral Mager on this point, which is, who are we educating and how do we do that? And I'm going to start with you, Sean, because your community is huge and the people that they work with are global.
Yeah, it's a challenge. As far as, well, let me back up a little bit. If you're a merchant mariner and you're licensed or unlicensed on board a ship, you're training constantly. And I'm going to say that because you have to keep up your certifications. There's multiple certifications that you're keeping active at one time. Once you get, if you work for a union, you could be on one company's ship who wants you to do their training. And the next ship you get on could be another company's ship who has different training for them. So the training is essential. The education is essential. I agree with Dr. Kessler on that. It has to be, we have to think outside the box when we think of how we're going to train seafarers effectively. Giving them a 20-minute video to watch and expecting them to have, to be at a certain level as far as cybersecurity goes is just not reality. And we can do that, and we can tick a box, and we can sign or initial a paper that says, yes, they had the training, and maybe that helps with insurance or liability, but that's not what we're trying to attack here. We're trying to attack the core of the problem. And if we ask them on their time off, which is very limited, especially right now during COVID, when we're having extreme difficulty getting mariners on and off of ships around the world and getting replacements and on board for them so that they can get home for some time off, much needed time off. When they go home, there's often training ashore that they're doing as well. So fitting this training in is essential, but how we do it, I think, needs some discussion, not just from the ship operations community, but the cyber community, because this is something that we can, I think, together we can accomplish. It's just how, right? I mean, we can provide the daily life of a mariner, and I think the cyber community can provide all the amazing techniques that are out there to do that.
Thank you, Sean. Admiral Mager, any thoughts?
Hey, Nina, thanks so much. First, let me just come back to Sean and say thanks to Sean for really highlighting some of the challenges that are faced across the industry. And certainly this industry is moving out to get after it. But just like anything, there's going to be folks that are really pushing the envelope and adopting it and moving forward, and then there's going to be folks that we got to bring along. And so we got to put attention across the board. With respect to training, I think Sean also hit on a really key issue that we're very sensitive to. So, within the prevention community here at Coast Guard headquarters, we oversee all aspects of the maritime transportation system. So I publish standards and conduct compliance activities for the credentialing of the mariners that run this industry. And so I am very sensitive to how much training we put on them and how much they're expected to know. And so I think that, while we need a standard kind of level of inoculation training across the whole of the public, I'm happy to see that my kids get some of that in terms of social media training in school and a little bit of the sneeze into your elbow kind of training to protect others from airborne viruses and those types of things. So we need that inoculation training for all. But I think that kind of some of the focused awareness that we need right now is at the company management level. Across the maritime transportation system, we consider cybersecurity as part of cyber risk management, right? Just as Gary highlighted, there are real safety issues to poorly designed software or software that injects, unstable operations just through its normal design. And so that's a risk that has to be managed in addition to the risk of intentionally, disrupting the system to go after it. And so that management level training is really focused on getting to the understanding that, hey, this is an operational imperative. It's something that, affects the bottom line for the company. There are a number of preventative steps that can be done to strengthen your ability to withstand attacks. And that's, getting together, having somebody accountable, getting a plan, doing the patching, doing the assessment, all that kind of stuff. But you're going to have to respond and be resilient in the face of attacks. And in the maritime industry, we require 2 steering pumps on board vessels because, hey, 1 steering pump is not good enough. There's a casualty, it takes out that single pump. You need to have redundancy. And so that kind of operational approach to that IT admin network, to that cybersecurity, really critical. I think that's the key part of the education campaign that we're focused on now. Of course, as Gary mentioned, workforce shortages, expertise shortages across the board. Really glad to participate in topics like this where we're bringing together maritime and cyber people, smashing them together to try and figure out some of these things and find a way to move forward. Thanks.
Gary, I see your mic is off. Go for it.
I actually wanted to scroll up to the top of the page just a little. We all know this, but I think it's worth saying anyway. The MTS, of course, is not monolithic. And it's not actually just the ships and the ports. I mean, when we look at one of the comments that Senator King made is, the worry is somebody who's clicking on something they ought not to click on. And ransomware always makes the news. But the biggest issues we continue to have in the maritime industry right now is still things like phishing attacks and frauds. And, Sean, to your point about training mariners, it's not the mariners who are clicking that are causing a ransomware attack to happen or a successful phishing attack. It's more like the workers within the shipping industry, the shipping lines themselves. Sometimes it's the workers at the port. So clearly, we need a different level of training and education through the broad spectrum of the entire MTS. But even just the basic knowing what to click on, knowing what not to click on, in the different sectors.
And I'll jump back in on that one if
for
you
it.
give me a sec. All right, thanks. I knew you were going to come up with a question, so let me just jump in there. Hey, I fully agree with Gary's point. This is not a monolithic industry; it's very diverse, and I also agree that when we take Sean's point and Gary's point, combine them together, we got to be really thoughtful about what training we put on the mariners themselves. I think if we look at, one of the kind of key outstanding questions for me is, where is the risk on board vessels? So what are those systems? And then how do we make sure that those systems are designed to be, to manage those risks? So if I think about all that goes on board a vessel, I think of the kind of primary risks that I want to manage on board the vessel are position keeping, Will it, will I be able to navigate safely and stay on station or go where I want to go? Stability, will I continue to float or will I sink to the bottom? And then handling of pressurized cargo. I think if we make sure that those three systems are as secure as can be, and those aren't pure systems that cross connect with a whole bunch of others, but those three functions are as protected as I want to be, then there's a whole bunch of stuff that we can do with the mariner outside of those systems, where they can check emails and do what they need to do, have access, plug in thumb drives, and not impact those systems. But that's why it's really important to bring together the industry, cybersecurity providers. The classification societies have stepped into this in a big way, and each have come up with cybersecurity or cyber safety notations for their work. And so we'll look forward to progressing that work and really focus on what is the threat and vulnerability within a ship, and then how do we adapt everything to drive that.
I see Josie and Sean both. So I'm going to start with Sean, and then I'll go to Josie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Gary, you make a good point. I mean, it's certainly not just the mariners. I think it's just more difficult to reach the mariners for training. I can tell you that, our operators and our companies they can put, they can bring people into a conference room and train them. You can do one-on-ones. It's just a way that we want to effectively reach the mariners because they're also a part of this. I mean, the first ship I got on board as a third mate didn't even have email on it. And by the time I came ashore, there was some sort of an internet, if you went to Yahoo 8 minutes later, everything would populate, but at least we got the news. So, we've come a long way in this progression. And I don't think as an industry, we were really prepared for what that does. And things just keep accelerating more. So let's take it a step further. And we used to get on a ladder to check reefer temps. Now, the temperatures of reefer containers on board a container ship are monitored from a desk in somebody's home or in an office, as is fuel efficiency, as is many engine parts on board the ship by a third party who now has connectivity into the ship. So there is certainly a lot of connection points in how we do this. And I think if we're talking about education, we're certainly not just looking at the mariners, we're looking shoreside, but we're also looking at, when you're going to go into an agreement with an engine manufacturer, what's their cyber protocol? Because all these connection points become threats, and we need to start blocking off and cutting off some of these threats to at least mitigate a risk of being vulnerable to a cyber attack.
Josie?
I think, and this is a concept I just throw out to the other panelists, but how great would it be if we had consensus on what would be the anatomy of a cyber risk manager? And then from there being able to apply different standards or training techniques, but having a commonality and understanding within, the folks, the end user of that cyber trained professional. So I did want to note that as a general concept. And then additionally, we're talking about specific threats. And I think, Admiral Mauger, you mentioned the three systems, that right there are mission objectives. And you mentioned the specific control systems that then influence or support or enhance that mission objective. And if you look at it from the system architecture and being able to derive, specific threat scenarios, impact scores or having some understanding of the risk threshold, I think would be useful as well.
Thank you, Josie. I want to I don't want to ignore our questions box, and I want to flip things over for a little bit to Gary, but I want to ask the panel, whoever wants to answer. I'm seeing questions about IT/OT. I'm seeing questions about MTS SCADA, and people's concerns about that capacity, and not just from the criminal. I want to flag just for a moment, because most of this conversation has been about business and malicious actors who are probably non-state actors. And I'm curious the degree to which it keeps you up at night, or do you even make this distinction strongly between non-state actors, state actors, and the capacity for IT/OT compromise, or are we still back at just trying to sort of get assessments and then go for it, Gary?
Well, since we're talking about IT/OT compromise, and Sean has already broached this by talking about the fact that there's somebody in an office somewhere that can monitor the cargo container temperature from an office back home. The industry, for a lot of good reasons, seems to be going forward with a lot more, not just automated systems, but autonomous systems on vessels. And certainly as we're starting to build from the keel up, autonomous cargo vessels, these vessels still need to comply with things like the collision regulations, which means that there's going to have some mechanism to have what appears to be a lookout, somebody doing a radar watch, things like that. Well, that means you're going to have some remote communication to the vessel. And I believe that it's probably naive to believe that we can have perfectly secure remote access to a vessel from an operations center that cannot be broken into by a bad actor, whoever that bad actor is. And so, that's one of the things that I would love to hear the industry talk more about. And as far as the bad actors, Senator King brought up the idea of, cyber war. And we need to be able to say, if there's an attack that we, can say to the attacker, we're going to come back at you. So think twice about doing this. But of course, in cyber war, we have the difficulty of attribution. And in fact, I would dare say, as somebody who sometimes put on, my attack mentality hat, if I believe that there's going to be a fierce response to a cyber attack, I would do everything I could to appear to be somebody else. And, let the attribution go where the fingerprints say the attack is coming from. Like I said, cyber war, we already know from Stuxnet that you cannot limit where a cyber weapon goes. But attribution of cyber weapons is also extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah, I would
Sean,
just respond. Yeah. So, great point, Gary, about the autonomous vessels as well, and completely agree that anytime that's there, it can be hacked or manipulated. Who hacks it or manipulates it when you're on a ship and you lose control or you lose a system? At that point, we don't really care who did it. It's a problem that we got to address right now, and in that respect. At IMO, we've been working on a gap analysis for autonomous ships. We completed that gap analysis, and what that means is that what in the international regulations is missing or doesn't jive or fit with an autonomous vessel. And this is an extremely detailed. It was an extremely detailed exercise, and all we're doing and all we did in that exercise was just identify what's missing. Solving those problems will take time. So, there are autonomous ships we're all aware of. Those are predominantly inland. There's no international large cargo ship going around the world right now that's fully autonomous. It doesn't exist. And there's no regulation in place for that to happen. And really the main idea you can think of there is if there's an oil spill, who's cleaning it up and how is it cleaned up? So that's MARPOL. That's a regulation that we haven't figured that part out yet. Autonomous is coming, but I think we have a little bit of breathing room until we have fully autonomous ships, if they're ever fully autonomous. My view is that there will always be some kind of what we would call a skeleton crew, or a few crew members on board. The ship might be drastically different than the 20-ish that we have on board currently. But as we went through that gap analysis, cyber is a big piece of that, and how do we get to the point where we're like the military, where you have somebody in Las Vegas that's driving a drone and dropping a bomb somewhere across the world, right? Can that get hacked? I don't know. But if we can't have that level of security for an autonomous ship, then, can we have autonomous ships? This is the question.
I want to follow up because there was a question in the chat, and I would love to hear answers back from the panel. either for autonomous or right or sort of conventionally crewed, I guess, ships. So the question is, what sort of requirements are there on ship manufacturers for proper network segmentation and software design? And then the questioner says some of the described ship requirements, positioning, floating, cargo management, they sound similar to airplane requirements.
Hey, Nina, I'll jump in there if you don't mind. Hey, okay, great. So I think this is one of the crux, and there were a couple of questions in there as well that focused on, hey, is IT, OT, or SCADA different in ships than it is in the rest of the industry? You know, where are the regulations going, that kind of stuff. And so I'm going to try and stitch a couple of these things together from my perspective. And so, first of all, this is an incredibly dynamic part of the industry. The speed at which, you know, IT, software, OT, communications, microprocessing, all coming together, changing extremely rapidly. And so, the general strategy in this phase, when you have, you know, an area of regulations that's changing so rapidly, is put performance-based standards. You know, hey, protect the system. You know, da 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 da. Put some performance on it, and then turn it over to third-party organizations, industry standards bodies to develop those detailed specifications to make those systems secure and work. And so that's the part that we're trying to get connected up right now. We have the classification societies. They're a key third-party organization within the maritime transportation system. These are the American Bureau of Shipping, the Det Norske Veritas organizations, the Lloyd's Register, that have developed detailed standards for the design of IT systems on board vessels, and will issue notations. So they've done that design and review, and they've done the checks after they've been developed. But that's all voluntary right now. So when it comes to the design and building with steel, mandatory standards by most federal government. So as we look at the changing landscape of regulations, we've gone past the point now, or we're at the point now where there are requirements for management plans. Now we need to start building in the requirements for some of these detailed standards for some of those most important things, but doing so in a way that leverages the work that's already going on in the industry to get after that. So I think, and I think what you'll also find is that in comparison between aviation and marine, aviation, I understand when you order a Boeing jet, you get to pick the color of the seats and you get to pick the paint that's on the outside. Everything else comes from Boeing, and that's what it is. When you're a ship owner working with the shipyard, you know, the sky is the limit, it seems, in terms of how you can configure all that control system and put everything together and customize it. I'm sure Sean will jump in and say it's not quite that simple, Admiral. But I've been down there when I've seen the owners drive up, you know, their pickup truck with a generator in the back and say, I want this thing on my ship. So, you know, there is much less standardization across the design and configuration, and that's why it's really important that we work with international standards making bodies to get this work done, to put those standards in place, and then the common maritime organizations that can turn those into regulations or standards that can be enforced. Thanks.
Thank you. You know, you're reminding me of, gosh, I forget who was. I feel like it was Barry Pavel, to be honest, but this sort of the interesting way in which when you purchase a car, nobody asks you whether or not you want the seat belts, right? That's just it's part of the car, and it's you know, it would be nice to find ourselves in that position. I think just as a consumer in general, and not, you know, let's not even talk about industry at this level. I wanted to talk a little bit, just because someone flagged this, and I think it's not clear to me that our audience, especially for those who are new to the marine transportation system, although I think the Navy calls it the Maritime Transportation System, and so this question of whether or not the Coast Guard Academy and the Merchant Marine Academy do very much to incorporate cybersecurity education into the curriculum in order to increase expertise. And I ask this question in part because we have all been educated to death, and there's no space left in the curriculum, and we have to start cutting things. And so I'm curious what the panel's thoughts are on this.
I'll jump in. King's so we are working on that. We're trying to work with the Kings Point, and I think Coast Guard has. I'm not sure about Coast Guard Academy, but speaking for the state maritime academies and the Merchant Marine Academy, we're trying to get cyber in there. The curriculum, like you said, is extremely challenging. I graduated from Kings Point. You go to school 11 months a year, and you're at school, or you're at sea for 320 days, so you can sit for your license at the end. So really what you're working on is those key points to pass that license exam and also get your bachelor's degree at the same time. So that's a challenge. And I think Coast Guard, I know Naval Academy built a big cyber center that they were working on. Admiral might be able to talk about Coast Guard.
Hey, thanks, Sean. I'm happy to jump in there. I know Gary Kessler has some expertise as well. Up at the Coast Guard Academy, we do have a cyber major, and so there's a combination of some training for everyone, and then a opportunity to major in cybersecurity for a smaller number of cadets that are so inclined. And then in addition to that formal education that they get, there's also the opportunity to participate in clubs and activities that further the knowledge. We have the opportunity for cadets that major in cyber to come right from the academy, get their commission, and serve here at Coast Guard Cyber here in Washington, D.C. To build out or to build on the skill sets that they've already learned and help us to operationalize cyber within the Coast Guard and achieve missions there within the Coast Guard.
Actually, the only thing I would tack on to what Admiral Mauger just said is that the first cohort of cyber systems majors will be commissioning in May.
Go ahead, Josie.
I was just going to piggyback on what Admiral Mauger said. I think also it's worthwhile to note that the Coast Guard is trying to retain and recruit actively folks with cybersecurity education, to the extent that there are, bonuses, recruitment, et cetera, which is, lauded.
Thanks for that, Josie. So I've got a great question, and I think it's I'll leave it open to anybody this is one of these sort of speculative. Is bribery by hackers of insider employees to assist in the hack part of the potential risk? Meaning, are people using the hacking as a service feature, right? To what degree do you take this into your consideration as people who think about MTS?
I don't know that hacking as a service or bribery of an insider is any more prevalent within the MTS than it is anywhere else. I mean, it's not zero, but it's not like every hack we hear about somebody got bribed. Is that sort of answering the question?
Go ahead, Josie.
I'm good.
Hey, Nina, I'll jump in on this one. I think Gary's right. I don't have the stats that show whether hacking as a service is more prevalent within the maritime transportation system than other segments of critical infrastructure or the economy writ large. But I can tell you personally, this is one of the issues you asked, a little bit earlier about what keeps you up at night. This is one of the issues that keeps me up at night because I think it gets to the point that the ability to social engineer somebody to get them to click on a link is one of the key challenges that we all have to work against. And you can sit there and say, hey, I'm disconnected, or we have a company policy on this, and this, or whatever it is. But with the commoditization of hacking, or the business model for hacking as a service, that really opens this up to anybody that's got a gripe. It could be a kid in a school that gets ticked off with the teacher or something like that, and then you can have a custom social engineered message that gets delivered just for that person to click on it, a lot more effective in that getting through. So I think, to me, it really just ups the ante for all of us to think about both those preventative measures and then the resiliency recovery measures, because it just increases the odds that you're going to get hacked from my perspective.
Thank you for your answers on that. I think it's this week, and there's a whole new set of vulnerabilities out in the universe. And I'm curious, from any of your perspectives, as we watch the the horizontal risk problem that is Log4j, right? This sort of fundamental vulnerability. Do you have any thoughts about what are your concerns? Just for MTS in general, or what are your concerns for vulnerabilities like this, and how can we get after it?
Hey, so I'll jump in there, not specifically about Log4j, but just how we're getting after this. This is part of the operationalization of this issue. You heard each of the panelists talk about this from their different perspectives. And so, what we've had to make sure is that within the Coast Guard, both for the protection of Coast Guard networks and for the protection of the maritime transportation system, we have a dedicated group of people that is looking at this, that is working both on the kind of intel prep for the battle space to understand what on the protection side, what our networks look like, what our vulnerabilities are, those types of things. On the MTS side, what's a common technology, what's kind of the state of the industry out there. And then we have to be able to ingest these things in real-time basis. We have to, kind of figure out what the risk position is, and then we got to share that out with everybody and manage that risk across the MTS, help others manage their own risks. And so a couple things that we've done to help get after this in real time. First of all, within Coast Guard Cyber, we established the Maritime Cyber Readiness Branch, whose job it is to work these issues every day, 24/7. We've put 22 cybersecurity advisors, MTS cybersecurity specialists. We have our LAN area advisor on the line, at least the LAN area one on the line here. So we've got 22 of them, 19 out in the port, or split between the nation's ports and our key regional areas. And these folks are key nodes for beating the bushes, talking to folks about these issues, engaging with the public, with the regulated facilities, so that they understand what those risks are and working those things as we go through the system. And then we've built out the cyber protection teams, as well as that reach back technical support that have that real in-depth analysis on adversary tactics, threat issues, and so that they can provide support to the local field commanders or local maritime transportation facilities when needed. None of that is a substitute for the facilities owning that own responsibility to do this kind of operational risk management within their facility, establish those relationships with experts, cybersecurity experts outside their facility who can provide them advice, connect in with the Maritime Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the ISAC, that can help them understand that as well. But together, we have to work this as a collaborative issue.
And I would just add to that, especially the end part there. I think what we see now, what our members see, is a gap in information sharing in as far as cyber goes in the maritime community, and that, like you said earlier, Admiral, it's a shared responsibility. It's industry and it's government, and we have to think of how we can share information not through traditional channels and channels that are not available to everybody. So, we bring up the ISACs are fantastic, but that's one avenue. And I can tell you, we're part of a discrete information sharing cybersecurity with shipping executives, and it's a for maritime by maritime, and sharing with government has been difficult at times because it's not traditional. And I think if we can get outside those boxes, because we need the right stakeholders in academia, in operations, in government, in ports, in ships, and all these different aspects with the right government executives, agencies, to be able to really effectively share information so that we're all learning from these things and that we're all getting smarter and smarter and better and better. We're not going to be able to chase the threats, we all know that, but we can better prepare ourselves by sharing our experiences. And I think we really need to work on closing that gap going forward.
I'm curious then, so the ISAC, by the way, for the folks, is information sharing and analysis centers, and these are sometimes private sector facilitated, but often intergovernmental and public groups. But I'm curious then if for most of cybersecurity, at least domestic in the United States, there are frequently collaborations and horizontal information sharing done offline in back channels, shared among working groups till solutions can be developed. It's sort of the cornerstone of how cybersecurity works in many spaces, and the cornerstone of how a lot of hackers work on the white hat side. What explains why it lacks this? This is still somewhat latent in the MTS. Anyone?
I would say, I'll take a quick stab at it. I would say, first of all, the diversity of the MTS, we've heard that time and time again. International business as well. And so there's lots of multinationals, involved in this industry. And I know you can point to financial and say, okay, got it. Multinationals involved in financials. But this one, diverse, from mom and pop operators all the way rolled up to big multinational companies. I think the other thing is we've, one of the key fundamental things that we've done is try to incorporate cyber into existing prevention response framework, existing models for regulations. And so that's both the strength and, as we just heard from Sean, it's also limiting as well. What I saw early on was treating cyber as something unique and special. I felt was overly limiting for, really getting after the problem at the scale at which we need to get after it. Because as long as we treated it as something special, it didn't apply to everybody. So we wanted to bring it in to our, existing frameworks and treat it like other risks that need to be managed there. But then that has some limitations on it too. I think that the other thing is that there's a lot of technology that we rely on that is common across, every sector. I mean, you think about vulnerabilities in Windows or some of the operating systems. These aren't unique to Maritime. They're unique to, or they're not unique to anything. They're just unique to IT. And so that's why we're really looking forward to participating in the CISA's Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, which brings together some of that collaboration between federal and private sector at a low level, to get after kind of that staffs working together like you described, and then elevating that information so that we can both do what we need to do, or we can all do what we need to do with it. I see Gary's jumped in here, so I'm gonna shut my mouth and listen for a little bit too.
Well, no, I wasn't jumping in as much as I think, and I'm happy to be corrected on this, that the global MTS before cyber didn't necessarily have a mindset of almost real-time collaboration and information sharing. I mean, I'm not exactly sure when would the Port of Kennewick be collaborating with Maersk and sharing information about things. But I think that cyber has made everybody realize to a certain degree that there's a fair amount of equalization, that they need to be talking to each other. But actually, this reminded me of another question that I'd like to pitch out to the panel. And that is, there's been some mention here of the class societies. We haven't talked about the role of insurers. And it seems to me that one of the things that insurers have a little bit of the juice that they've had is they've been able to say, hey, look, we're not going to insure you unless you tell us you're going to comply with IMO 2021 and then prove it. And so, your cyber coverage was sort of, what was the way in which people were being pushed, I guess, to do the right thing. But now, of course, we have some of the insurance companies like Lloyd's who made an announcement last week that they will exclude coverage of any cyber event that they deem to be part of a cyber war. Well, that seems to be a little bit of a chilling effect to me on cyber insurance, but I'm curious to get other people's views.
I saw Josie pop up and off, and so off of mute, and so I'm gonna force her to answer some version of that question. And I also just I want to leave just a little bit of time. I love, Gary, that you've opened the cyber insurance can of worms. And so if we can, I would love everyone to talk a little bit about it, but I want to make sure we say the last sort of 3 or 4 minutes so that you guys can get your saved rounds shot there. So Josie.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll echo curiosity as far as how the cyber insurance and the cyber insurance beast is laid out. What are the thresholds? At MITRE, we've tried to understand, are those thresholds applicable for any of the maritime work we're doing? Are there, any commonalities with marine casualties on the cyber side? How do you understand that threshold? And then therefore, provide the prevention resilience kind of mentality or framework, as Admiral Maugre mentioned. My understanding of some of the early cyber insurance is that it was much trial and error. The insurers were willing to bite off quite a bit of risk, assume quite a bit of financial burden, just by collecting data points of what were common claims, specifically with ransomware. My understanding is they've matured quite a bit, but it's still soft baked. They don't have. There's not, one standard amongst all of them as far as what are the thresholds, both financially as well as, outages or how they're quantifying it. So offer that.
I can't add too much of the technical side of how insurers are doing that, but it is something I can tell you that our members are concerned about, and the way they're addressing it right now is the very untechnical way of showing that they're doing everything they can to not be attacked, showing that they're part of information sharing groups, showing that they have, independently had cyber audits on their ship, showing that they've had additional maybe audits or training at the company level. Because the issue is, when we talk about IMO 2021, that's regulatory, but it's very open. It's very 60,000 foot view. And so the level that's taken to at each individual company is up to that company. And just because a class auditor comes on board the ship, it doesn't, and we've seen this, we've heard it from our members in ABS and DNV and Lloyd's, they've all said the same thing. It depends on that auditor that goes on board the ship and their level of cyber education, I would say, as to how far they're going to take that part of the audit. There's a lot of things to do in that audit, and cyber is one of them. And so it depends on how far they want to dig into that. We've had ships that are audited where it wasn't even brought up, and this is a month ago. We've had other ships in companies where they've spent an hour and a half digging and maybe gotten an observation or even a nonconformity on it. So it's all over the board. So as far as going back to the insurance part is what you asked, I know a lot of our members are saying, what else can we do? What else can we want to show that we have relationships with these third parties. We want to do everything we can to show the insurers, if we get to that point, that we did all we could.
Josie, go ahead.
Yeah, we've mentioned ISACs as far as seeking and sharing information. I'd be remiss if we didn't call out the trade associations as far as sharing of information. I had the pleasure of attending and participating in API's cyber conference at the beginning of November, and attending in 2017, and then attending this year. The level of just camaraderie, candor, sharing of information, that was my major feedback to, I think Michael Lewis is on the line. Major feedback to the folks that organize that is that you're getting folks to talk, you're getting folks in the room and having a dialogue about what's real and what's going on.
Cass, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to throw in, Josie, you just made an excellent point. And I would be remiss if I failed to mention some of the other places, like Singapore has an information, IFC, and you'd think I could remember what that meant. But it's information sharing center as well, where basically anybody who wants to get their information, who's a stakeholder, is in, and it's government funded. And I think that one of the concerns that I have with the ISACs and the ISAOs is that they're membership organizations. So some of the information gets out, like the MTS ISAC just did a really, really nice webinar about the Port of Houston last week. But there's a lot of stakeholders within the MTS that just don't have the budget or whatever to be a member of all these things. And so they're slow to get the information.
Sean, I saw you pop up, and then I'm going to ask everybody for roughly 30 seconds or less of their saved round. What last thing they want the world to hear from you? But go ahead, Sean, first.
No, just real quick. I mean, Gary, you hit the nail on the head. And it just needs, there's so many other avenues out there. And I think ISACs or ISALs are one of those avenues. But, as Admiral Mauger mentioned earlier, area maritime security councils, they actually even have put cyber working groups inside of those area maritime security councils. And I know a lot of our members are actively involved in those 35 around the country. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can do this. Just how do we bring it all together?
Thank you for that, Sean. As long as I have you up on camera, why don't we saved round? One thing, 30 seconds or less. What do you need the world to know?
No, I appreciate being here and having this conversation with all of you. It's definitely I can't say it's the start because I've talked with a lot of you over this for many, many years, but I think that it's a conversation we just have to keep continuing. We have to do more like this. Thanks, Atlantic Council, for putting this together. Thanks for including the Chamber of Shipping of America and our members. It's something we take extremely seriously. We work on every day. And other than that, please, I'm available. So please, anybody that's listening, contact us, and love to continue this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Admiral Mauger?
Hey, Nina, thanks so much. And thanks again to the Atlantic Council for doing this. One thing broken up into 3 small segments. Reporting, grants, and response. Okay, so on the reporting side, we didn't get a chance to talk about it much, but cyber incident reporting, hugely important in the Coast Guard for regulated facilities required to report without delay. But it's a big issue because it's about protecting everybody. It's not about what happened to your facility, certainly, or your vessel. We'll get there. We'll deal with that. But it's really about building that shared awareness across the full spectrum of everybody. On the grant side, we've talked throughout this panel about how important this maritime transportation system is to the nation. We've seen huge numbers of growth in the MTS and volumes of cargo through the nation's ports. But our grants the Port Security Grant Program has been flatlined for 7 years now. And so I think as we look at taking on even bigger challenges or taking on these big challenges with more force, we really need to think about the right level of grants and awareness. Last year, we awarded $17 million, didn't meet all of the demand, and it certainly doesn't address probably the full spectrum of need that we need to get after this. And then the last thing is response. I thought the Raising the Colors does an amazing job of really talking about a framework and a number of key issues that need to be worked, but would foot stomp the importance on response as well, because I don't think it's when somebody's going to get attacked, or I'm sorry, I don't think it's if somebody's going to get attacked, it's when they're going to get attacked. It was my big line and I blew it, But anyway, so we need to be prepared on the response side, and all the discussion that we had about the shortage of people across different skills and different expertise. This is going to be a mutual aid assistance kind of issue where folks from different companies are falling in on each other to help out and help address this issue. And so that common lexicon about, hey, what is this type of responder? What's the framework that we're going to use to respond as a unified body to get after this? I think those are important issues that need to be addressed as well. Thanks again so much for the opportunity.
Always a pleasure, Admiral Mauger. Gary, and then Josie, I'm going to hold you to 30 seconds or less.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks, Nina. Thanks, everybody else. This has been really cool. My background is mostly as an engineer, and so I always think that the shortest point between, or the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. But as I have come to learn, and without overusing a marine metaphor too much, I think just the discussion we've had here has shown that just the tip of the iceberg, if you will, of the complexity of everything we need to deal with. And on the one hand, it appears like the MTS is moving at the pace of a sloth, getting stuff fixed. But I think actually that the pace of improvement in just the last few years has been incredibly fast, given the complexity of the beast that we are working with. So I guess that's there's still more to do, but I don't think anybody's been remiss.
I appreciate your optimism, Cass, as always. And so our last parting shot is going to be Josie Long, and then we'll turn this over to Trey Hare.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you for facilitating a great panel, and thank you. It was an honor to my fellow panelists and Atlanta Council for organizing this. So final thoughts, I started off talking about cybersecurity culture, collaboration. All of us are most likely like-minded. So that change management aspect of the folks that aren't getting the big picture and how do we reach them is kind of my big idea to part with.
Fantastic. And with that, Trey Hare.
Well, thank you very much, Nina, and thank you to everybody for the panel and the discussion. This is not the last time we're going to be talking about this in the coming year, but it is the last time we're talking about it in this year. So thanks all for spending a little pre-holiday time with us. If you haven't had a chance, please do read Raising the Colors. I think it's, as Admiral Margaret kindly pointed out, it's a starting point for a longer conversation and hopefully some more action on these issues. A big thank you to the Atlanta Council events team, and particularly to Will Loomis, the Assistant Director of the Cyber Statecraft Initiative, for making this possible and for co-authoring said report, now praised by multiple folks, including Senator King. We appreciate your time, and I think in particular, we appreciate your ideas. So if you have feedback on anything you heard in the discussion today, please flow it to us. This is intended to be a conversation starter, not a broadcast mechanism. We are somewhat limited, however, in how we can take your feedback in. So please reach out to us over email if you haven't contacted us through the chat. Other than that, enjoy the rest of your evenings, your weeks, your holidays, and the rest of 2021. Thank you again, and we'll see you next year. Take care.